Support comes from Gemma, architects, planners, and designers seeking to bring joy to their clients and communities. Details at gemastl.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. School is one of the many places where young people get an education. Learning also happens in families, in neighborhoods, amid various communities and environments. That means that students don't enter classrooms as empty vessels waiting to be filled. Nevertheless, being in school, particularly as a college student, can afford lessons as well as opportunities to engage with people and ideas in important ways. Jonathan Pulphus was a sophomore at St. Louis University when 18-year-old Michael Brown Jr. was fatally shot by police officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson in 2014. In response, Pulphus joined and led protests in the St. Louis region and on the SLU campus. He was also a co-founder of Tribe X, a student activist group that negotiated the Clock Tower Accords with the then president of St. Louis University. It's been just over a decade since the Ferguson Uprising began, and last month, With My People, Pulphus's new book, which combines memoir, academic exploration of protest movements, and a blueprint of grassroots organizing, was published. He joins us today to talk about it. Jonathan, welcome to St. Louis on the Air, and congratulations.
Thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate you all.
So Jonathan, your time at SLU, it forms the majority of your book, With My People. But before we dive into that period, I'd like to hear about the education you got before stepping foot on your college campus. Your first teachers were your family, and there's an incident that you relate about being in the car with your mother in 2009 and an exchange that you had with her that definitely involves some schooling.
For sure.
Tell us about that.
For sure. So at the time I was a student at Crossroads College Prep. I was in the 8th grade when Obama had been elected in 2008. And my mom and my dad, prior to me going to any school, grounded me spiritually, believing in God, but also believing in serving others, leading by serving others. And so my mom engulfed both my siblings and I in different experiences around grassroots organizing. We worked with this group called M-Slice through the leadership of Queen Mother Ramona Taylor Williams. And so we got to work with her on different projects in North St. Louis. But that particular day, in the midst of doing all this work that we do as a family, and as a community, Obama had been saying something in response to Trayvon Martin, his murder. And what ended up happening was my mom was critiquing how Obama was, on one hand, saying if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon. But on the other hand, he was kind of sympathetic to the law enforcement side of things. First of all, any death, period, is bad. But we're talking about a teenage boy. And while George Zimmerman was not a police officer, very much the same people that sympathize with police when there are instances of police brutality, that same crowd came to defend George Zimmerman. And so my mom was just saying Obama himself, could have did more on behalf of our people in that instance and stuff like that. So yeah.
What made that moment so memorable and such an enduring lesson?
It's funny that you bring up that particular instance because, during my commutes from North St. Louis, where I'm from, to school, I went to Crossroads College Prep on Delmar and the Bolivar. And so during my commutes to school, my mom would immerse us with sometimes, tunes on the radio from Hot 104.1 or the R&B station. But she also made it very educational and informative. She would give us access to stations like NPR and stuff like that. And it's like full circle for me to be here today. And so I think the main thing is that my mom wanted to make sure that we had been primed intellectually and cerebrally preparing for the day. And that we were aware of community affairs, that we weren't existing or operating in a bubble or in a vacuum or in a silo. That we had a pulse on what's happening around us locally and on a regional and national level.
Did that change the way that you listened to things, that particular incident?
It did, because, you know, when Obama got elected, I was elated. I was happy. You know, I was like, we got our first black president.
And you were 14 at the time?
I was like about
13,
13, 14 at the time. And, you know, he spoke very respectably, and he was polished and all these other things. But when my mom was still holding him accountable for things that he was not doing the best at, it made me be critical of leadership in a certain kind of way, and critical, even though, you know, on a representation level, I felt good. As I grow older and my political analysis matured and I came to a better understanding, I was able to then see some of the checkered parts of what comes with some of our leaders and things like that. And so, for example, you know, the whole issue with Obama and his engagement with you know, the occupation of different countries and things like that through the military, how he signs off on some of those things. So there are different things that, you know, kind of, if you will, you know, brought reality to the fore for me. And my mom was very vital in making that happen.
That account, what you just shared with us, is part of a chapter that is called We Outside. What does outside mean, Jonathan?
Yeah, so We Outside is a term, you know, coming back from my neighborhood. That's the first time I actually heard it used. I'm from the Meadows of 23rd Street in North St. Louis. And when we say we outside, it essentially means that we refuse to stay in the home, you know, and we're here to make a statement. We're here to establish a presence. And what comes with that is what comes with that, whether you're ready for it or not. We are here. And I titled that chapter that because that was the mindset of many who chose not to stay home in response to the murder of Mike Brown. They chose to be in the streets. They chose to be outside. They chose to leave their school wasn't in session, but they chose to, you know, step out of class and come in the streets. They chose to leave their jobs, come in the streets. They were outside literally and figuratively.
The other thing that struck me about outside, you've mentioned a couple times that you went to Crossroads, and in the book you talk about what your experience was like there. How does outside also apply to what you experienced at Crossroads?
Yeah, so at Crossroads College Prep, we were outside in many ways. It's not about necessarily a physical location. It's a mentality. It's a mindset, right? So when I was at Crossroads, one of the things that me and my peers, I was on the basketball team. I like to joke. I averaged 30, and 30. You know, 30 minutes getting water, 30 minutes cheering on the team, and 30 minutes on the bench. But during the games, when they did the Pledge of Allegiance, I got hip and I got in the know to, you know, the Black Power movement and stuff. Around that time, the Black Power mixtape came out, and my older sibling, Pulphus, actually took me to go see it. And John Carlos, Tommy Lee Smith, and stuff like that, what they were doing during the national anthem, that's one thing that me and my peers at Crossroads were doing during the national anthem, holding up our fists to show solidarity with those on the margins. And it's funny because my coach at the time, Coach Abdul Hamid, he ended up calling me in his office later on and told us that we had to stop doing that. And I was like, why? And he was just explaining he was getting complaints from different parents and stuff and all things like that. So part of my journey early on is I realized you got to pick and choose your battles and things like that. But we still wanted to make a statement. We still were outside and we still were communicating what needed to be communicated.
The following chapter is titled Elbows, Fast Feet, and Butt Cheeks. And in that, you write, without the community, there'd be no students. Without students, there'd be no schools. The basic unit of any community is the neighborhood, and thereafter is the family. Talk about what this means for this book, Jonathan.
For sure. So often when you talk about people who are like, how do I get involved? How do I get activated? I was told a long time ago when I first, you know, was cutting my teeth when it came to organizing it, that you organize where you live, right? So you don't have to start national. You don't have to start international. You can start right outside your front steps at your home. And so I want to encourage people to start small and then branch out from there. Start with the family, then you go to the neighborhood. Then you go to the community. Then you're talking about the city, or you're talking about a particular ward. And so, and I really emphasize it, without the relationship between community and schools, because we often look at them as detached, right? Like the school exists and then the neighborhood exists. But, there are businesses in the community that support the school, or at least the people patronize from the school and things like that. There are public goods connecting both of them and things like that, sidewalks, streets, emergency responses, all those different things. Whether it be a private school or a public school, the issues in the community have a correlation to what's happening in the school building, because the students live in those communities, have to come to school, and they're bringing a lot of what they experience outside of school to school. Some of that's trauma, some of that's, more positive things, like, maybe they got a baby was born in a family that's sharing it with their student body. But also on the flip side, it may be a loss of life that happened in the community not due to natural causes, and that's something that's on their mind when they're in school. They want to do something about it. They want their school to make a statement. They want something addressed. And so that's really what I was emphasizing with that point.
Mm-hmm. So you decided to go to St. Louis University.
I did.
Given everything that you've shared so far about community, what you learned from family, what you learned from being in the schools that you attended in different places, why did you decide to stay here and go to St. Louis University instead of perhaps going to an HBCU somewhere else in the country?
I'll be honest with you, Elaine. If I would have went to the HBCU, I don't think I would have finished in 4 years.
Okay, why is that?
I might have a family or some more stuff in college. But going to SLU, to put that lightly, but going to SLU was an ideal choice for me. For one, a lot of my family have already been Billikens, and I fancy myself a Black Billiken, a Black alumni. But my grandmother was one of the earliest students who attended the university through her nursing program, Naomi Charlene Pulphus. She attended, I think, she graduated in the early 60s. And my mom also took classes at SLU. And then I have other people connected to me who also went to SLU. So being a Billiken, when I was at Crossroads and when I was coming up in middle school, when my mom was taking professional studies and classes, we would be in the actual gymnasium on campus, just playing basketball, things like that, at the age of 10, 11, and 12 years old. So I was familiar with the campus as well. But as I got older, one thing I grew to appreciate, and what really attracted me to the university was its humanistic mission, which states, the pursuit of truth for the greater glory of God and the service of humanity. And because of that mission statement, that Jesuit charism and that Jesuit statement, that also motivated me and resonated with me as somebody who was a budding activist and youth organizer.
Mm-hmm. How aware were you of the social and cultural climate of what you were going into?
I knew I was attending an all-white school, and there's something that comes with that, right? So I went to all-white schools since middle school. I went to Crossroads, and I ended up going to SLU. For Crossroads for middle school, then I went Crossroads for high school, and then I went to SLU. So I was already aware of, what it feels like to be the only one in the classroom, when I have a diverse student body or a diverse staff or faculty and things like that. I was aware of that. But being on my own, because I actually lived on campus, so while I went to school in my hometown, it was a different experience being on campus because, I was on my own. I had to get my own meals, I had to do, take care of myself in many different ways. And so in doing that, when there were incidents that popped off on campus, for example, there was a demonstrations following a brown-face party that one of the white sororities on campus had hosted, mocking Hispanic people. There were peer mentors of mine, people who were classes above mine, who spoke out and denounced that and demonstrated against that. So I saw the mission being modeled in that way, people speaking out against racism and systemic injustice on campus. That helped me kind of adjust to the climate, because instead of feeling like an object with things being done to me, I could actually have agency and actually participate and actually addressing some of these concerns that were happening on campus.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with community organizer Jonathan Pulphus about his new book, With My People, Life, Justice, and Activism Beyond the University. We need to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about Jonathan's experience as a Ferguson movement participant and leader, including Occupy SLU and the Clock Tower Accords. I'd like to invite you to this conversation as well. How have you seen student protests foster social and political change? Have you participated in campus protests yourself, either recently or in decades past? Give us a call at 314-382-8255. That's 382-TALK. You can also send us an email at talk@stlpr.org. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from the St. Louis Public Library Foundation. During these challenging times, free access to digital resources is a necessity. You can help our community stay connected. Support your St. Louis Public Library at slpl.org.
Welcome back. Let's return to our conversation with Jonathan Pulphus. Jonathan is a native St. Louisan, activist, and author of With My People, a new book out just last month. Part memoir, part academic history, and part protest handbook, With My People provides a deep dive into Jonathan's experience as a Ferguson movement participant and leader, a social movement that followed the fatal police shooting of 18-year-old Michael Brown Jr. in 2014. Jonathan, you were just about to start your sophomore year at St. Louis University in early August, pre-August 8th. At that point, and in that context, you were already pursuing justice on campus. How was that directly related to justice as you were seeking it on the streets of St. Louis?
For sure. So prior to Mike Brown's murder on August 9th, there had been another incident that happened at St. Louis University. So I referenced the Brownface incident earlier and stuff like that. Someone on campus had the gall to go into the student center on campus and on a wide, huge screen write homophobic and racist slurs on the screen. I'm not going to repeat them on air, but if your mind, whatever slur comes to mind, is probably the one that was on there. And in response to that, that lit a fire in a lot of my peers on campus, within the Black Student Alliance, within the Rainbow Alliance on campus. And so there was a coalition of students who were trying to get the university to address this issue. And a press conference was hosted that invited the then interim president of SLU, Bill Kaufman. And he was like, basically he was on his way out, but he said he passed it along to the next president, who ended up being Fred Costello. So Fred was fresh in office when the murder of Michael Brown happened, and the same momentum and the same fire and the same push and passion we had from that spring semester, we brought that in the fall. And what really made it worse for us, well, for me in particular, I'm sure my peers can relate, who were there at the time, was that we felt like SLU had a real tepid and kind of nonchalant and indifferent response to what was happening less than 10 miles away from the campus, right, less than 15 minutes away. And there were no calls for that humanistic mission that invited me and made me feel like I was a part of the Billiken family. I felt betrayed, and I felt like they weren't honoring it by ignoring and neglecting what was happening in the community, right? And so that lit a fire under me, and I chose to be out there. So there was a vigil out there on August 10th that was going on. And so me, Alicia Sanye, now Alderwoman Alicia Sanye, Jamie Cox, now Alderwoman Jamie Cox, and Christopher Walter, my brother at SLU, we ended up going to Ferguson to bear witness, but also stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters out there on the front lines. And that escalated in many different ways all over the place. Ended up getting pepper spray ferociously pepper spray, I say that, for trying to stop police armed with dogs and these armor-like pistol-looking devices, weapons, trying to attack children out there. This is before the Quick Trip ended up going in flames and things like that. But what I will say that was beautiful about the moment was the amount of solidarity out there in the streets. It was just packed. It was filled. People, celebrating, playing Lil Boosie's F the Police from their cars, playing Fight the Power, that B, Chuck D and them. And so it was a lot of solidarity and stuff like that out there. But to answer your question, without going too far off the rails, that's kind of how the momentum carried me going into the fall.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Jonathan, you were not in school just yet.
Mm-mm.
But what was it about being a college student at the time? What did it permit or give you room to do that had you been in high school or maybe fresh out of university that you likely might not have been able to engage with?
Yeah, so I had access to the resources on my campus. That was huge, right? And so, for example, when I was writing opinion editorials critiquing the university or critiquing elected officials and their tepid responses to what was happening, I was able to use the wealth of knowledge in Pius Library as a full-time student and get access to that. And I was also employed there, so that was major. There were countless requests from people out in the movement during those early days to use St. Louis University as a space to host different events or workshops around skill building and developing and teachings and political awareness education and stuff like that. And as a student, I was able to book those rooms to make that happen as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say being a resource to myself and others was one of the ways as a full-time student I was able to do certain things. But also as I was out there demonstrating, I was also in living the organizing life, I was also learning, right? So I was taking African American studies courses and stuff like that. I had access to knowledge in that way too. And some of the readings, some of the writings that I was exposed to outside of Shakur's autobiography through Dr. Katrina Thompson Moore or Dr. Bradley talking about what Eurocentricity was and bringing up different past student movements in his work, I was able to be exposed by the lessons left for me through these professors to help prime or calibrate my perspective in ways that complicated my understanding of systems and how it wasn't just about this one incident. It was about a pattern and a practice of injustice that happens. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And on that note, I mean, what we have in this book, there is the memoir part of it, but there's also academic research. Why did you include that and sort of interweave it all throughout the accounts of what you experienced?
So I want to give credit, and I didn't do this earlier, I wanted to give credit to Rachel Salmons, my publicist, Jared Harrison, my editor, Marissa Urena, L. Dow, that Ferguson activist and pastor who was my bridge to Broadleaf to be published, who connected me with her editor, Lisa Klosky, and I got my contract, etc. But I'm bringing that up because you asked that question. When I originally submitted with my people, it didn't include any of that academic essays. It was purely straight storytelling. My feedback I got from my editor was he's like, we typically don't do memoir and things like that. And even if you look at L. Dowd's book, Baptized in Tear Gas, it's a mix of sermons and things like that they came up with a mix of some of their own storytelling from their personal life. And so he was like, but if you add this academic focus on it, you can bring out the storytelling kind of ethnography, and then you have that combined with, what we're talking about in terms of the academic side of things. And so that's how that came to be. And I appreciate it because I was able to tease out themes and lessons I had through my storytelling and elaborate on it in a way that was more to intellectualize some of the things that I was trying to communicate. So an audience that appreciates the memoir part of it, you get that, but also an audience that appreciates, this is the research that I've done related to this particular question on protest and on organizing, on demonstrating. You have that as well.
Mm-hmm. What does make this book compelling is, though, what you share about the things that you experienced directly. And about the action that you were taking. You and 11 others came together to create the protest group Tribe X in September of 2014, and its goals were to educate, empower, and organize. Jonathan, what made the formation of Tribe X necessary or urgent?
So when Ferguson kicked off, you had really strangers coming into contact with strangers. So majority of people in Tribex, when it was at its fullest capacity in terms of members, I didn't know prior to Ferguson, right? I mean, I knew SOS Ransom Talai, I knew Alicia Sanye, we were partners at the time. Of course, the mentors of Tribex included Mama Mix, Queen Mother Ramona Taylor Williams, Mama Lola. Those were our advisors. I knew them. But I didn't know Rocket, right? Brandon Ali. I didn't know Darius. I didn't know Daruba Shakur. I didn't know H.J. Huey Jackie, and so because strangers were coming into contact with strangers, the trusting wasn't completely there, but because everybody was standing in solidarity for a similar cause, it was like, let's move forward. So Lost Voices is one of the groups that can't end up being formed. Millennial Activists United got formed. Brittany and Alexis and Ashley Yates. So what ended up happening was, because we were seeing each other, we became familiar with each other, and our mentors kind of helped weave and kind of connect us in a way where we had our first meeting at that McDonald's on West Forest at the time in Ferguson. And from that, we established mission, values, things like that. And with the help of, and I emphasize this in the book, intergenerational perspective and what's happening and collaboration. That was one thing that actually distinguished Tribex, I think, from other groups, is that we were very vocal and we were accountable to not just ourselves or the people, but we had mentors and advisors that helped guide us, and that helped a lot during Occupy Soon. We got those demands submitted. But Tribex, it was a beautiful thing that came together, and there have been talks about trying to get the band back together, if you will. But we got people that started families, that moved in school and college, EJ at Loyola, etc. So we'll see.
And getting back together for
the work continues. I literally continue with that Portuguese war cry. Like, it's so many things that and I talk about this lightly in the book, how Tribe kind of imploded, right? We felt vulnerable. We were young, at the time. You know what I'm saying? I'm every bit of 30 now. I don't look like it, but I'm every bit of 30 now. You know what I'm saying? So, at the time, we were just wrestling with a lot of personality, ego, a little bit of greed here and there. You know what I'm saying? Not throwing no shade at nobody, but we're mature now. We could talk about it. But the battle and the reason why we were formed, there's still a call for that. There's still a need for that. There's still a demand for that. And so the work may look different. We're all still civically engaged in our own ways, But I think coming together like Transformers, like we did in the past, to shut stuff down is still possible.
Tribe X with the Black Student Alliance negotiated what came to be called the Clock Tower Accords with the then president, who was a new president, which you've mentioned earlier, at the time of St. Louis University, Dr. Fred Pistello. Jonathan, what made or makes the Clock Tower Accords remarkable, and how were they about more than SLU, and in fact about the community?
Yes. So the Occupy SLU encampment itself was a combination of, was not just a student-led effort, right? That was a combination of both community and students. And so the Accords, the demands, the outcome, the finish point had to also be about community, right? And so there was 13 accords, 13 promises, 13 commitments the university made to both Tribex and BSA. And M-Sites was also a partner on there as well, Queen Mother Ramona Taylor Williams group. And the idea was we wanted a K-12 pipeline for marginalized groups, particularly Black students, right? For a university that sits in a city that's almost half Black, or at the time was half Black, you could throw a rock on campus in the most public space and miss every Black student there. Not that I would want that to happen, I'm just saying.
Right.
And the reality is that, yes, it's a private school, but also SLU doesn't pay no taxes, doesn't contribute to the tax base in the area, right? So you're just taking and taking and taking. You had the history with Mill Creek, right? You got the work that Robin Prouty's doing with the descendants of St. Louis University enslaved, where her ancestors helped literally build SLU. So the history or connection with the Black community hasn't been the best. And so we were saying as a group, look, we need access to a university that's taken so much from us, And so that was the main thing. We wanted there to be a community center also, right? How wonderful would it be not on no colonial stuff where we're just occupying land and we're just taking up space. How awesome would it be for Sue to have invested or collaborated with different grassroots entities and different organizations to build a community center in North St. Louis, on the west side of St. Louis, where the public education system at the time and even now, is in crisis. What does it mean for Sue to do that and to provide perhaps, wraparound services to support folk in, deepening its brand and identity where people feel like SLU isn't a place with just these gates that we just walk past. It's inaccessible to us, but it's possible for you to actually go there. When I talk to a lot of young people, even today, SLU seems like it's in an oasis, right? It's not attainable, it's not reachable, right? And so we wanted to outline all those different calls to actions for there to be a connection between what's happening in the community, what's happening on campus, and bridge that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We need to take a quick break here, but we'll be back shortly to continue our conversation with St. Louisan activist and author Jonathan Pulphus. We'd like to invite you to the conversation as well. If you have a question or comment about student protest movements, call us at 314-382-8255. That's 314-382-TALK. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. Welcome back. This hour, we've been speaking with St. Louisan Ferguson movement activist and author Jonathan Pulphus. His new book, With My People, combines memoir and protest movement history and offers a blueprint for grassroots organizing with college students particularly in mind. We have a caller from St. Louis. Amy, welcome to St. Louis on the Air.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Sure, go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the current political state of SLU as I am a recent graduate, especially concerning the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Yes, go ahead. Is there something you'd like to ask?
No, I just wanted to comment on, I wanted to say that it seems like there was a lot of negative pushback during these protests on campus. Specifically concerning an app called Yik Yak. This is like an anonymous app where students can say anything they want, basically. And during the protests, it seemed like a lot of students were disturbed by them, specifically saying that the protests were disruptive on campus, too loud, interrupting my study time. And I just thought that was something that was interesting to share.
Mm-hmm. Amy, thank you. Jonathan, what do you have to say?
Amy, the purpose of protests isn't to be. These slogans and these bullhorns aren't there for. They're there for a reason. They're not there for a lullaby. So it's going to be loud. It's supposed to rock the proverbial ship. And if people feel up some kind of way about that, whoop-de-doo. That's too bad. As far as the Israeli-Palestine thing, Sue does have an issue where Boeing and Julian Garcia, I salute him and his people like Nadia, who I haven't met yet, who have that Occupy SLU coalition that kind of grew out of what we did in 2014. They're students at SLU. Who are pushing the university to honor and live up to its mission with regard to its association with Boeing's ties to the arms and weapons that are, or drones that are being, used in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So I salute students doing that work. Students like CJ, yourself, for calling and asking or making that comment. And I'll land with this. I don't want to be too long, but Yik Yak was around when I was at SLU. And they tore me apart in Yik Yak. I'm talking about they put in that, and it's an anonymous message board. It's ugly. You can up to support a comment. You could down to whatever, but or to disagree with a comment. But they had stuff in there calling me homophobic slurs, calling me racist slurs. They threatened to bang on my dorm door in the middle of the night, saying if Pulphus, if Pulphus won't let us study, we won't let them sleep, all kinds of stuff. They said Pulphus won't let them study because I did a protest at the library. So you have all kinds. I had death threats, calls for expulsion, arrest, all kinds of stuff happens. But that's kind of a cost that comes with this work as an organizer, and that's why I wrote this book, because I want young people to realize there's emotional, mental, psychological, and physical costs that come with this work, and to prepare and be ready to anticipate that proactively so you can take care of yourselves and take care of each other.
Mm-hmm. Amy, thank you so much for calling. Jonathan, do you think that there's a way that that protest or activism is romanticized, and that's part of the reason it's important to have conversations like this?
Yeah, because that's why it's important to take an African American studies course, take a multicultural studies course, the same courses that they're trying to get you to say this DEI and it needs to be stopped, and it doesn't. We need to go back to the American truth. What the American truth? What American truth? Right? You all neglect and ignore and gloss over and whitewash everything. And so to your question, it's very important that when we're wrestling with things like, being informed on past movements because they inform the present. Please repeat your question again, because it was a point I wanted to make.
Oh, about protest and activism being romanticized.
Yes. So Rosa Parks wasn't the first person to sit down on that bus and cause hell. That's not the case, right? You had Claudette Colvin before Rosa Parks. If you don't know who Claudette Colvin is, you need to take an African American Studies course or read a book. You know what I'm saying? There's these romanticized, notions that men and cis hetero men are pretty much the front line of every movement and stuff like that. When there's actually black women, queer women of color, people who don't identify in that way who are also putting in work and getting the job done. And Ferguson revealed that some of the dopest actions were put on outside of Tribex, but were put on by groups like Millennial Activists United. I'm thinking about a Hispanic sister by the name of Elizabeth Vega. Do your homework on her. So, that kind of complicates the notion and the respectable image and stuff like that. Or that the old guard, you had the NAACP and the Urban League that came through and saved the day. While they did and are doing great work, it was the people in the streets, the people that some people hold their purse close to them when they're on their elevator, or they got tattoos and they sag their pants or they wear locks. Dr. Stefan Bradley talks about this in his book, If We Don't Get It. It complicated, the streets were actually out there, and so it complicates romanticized notions of what organizing looks like, or the professionalizing of protests and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So Professor Chris Tinson, who is at St. Louis University, history professor, has been on the show to talk with us, and we spoke with him in March about the federal crackdown on universities and student protesters in particular. Here's what he had to say.
We are living through the production of a culture of fear in which the powerful entity, in this case our presidential regime, thrives off of that cultural fear. They want people to feel vulnerable. They want people to feel under threat. They want people to feel that they're constantly being watched and surveilled. And some of that we do ourselves, right? Because we're on social media so much. It's kind of like these systems that are purported to be, freedom of speech vehicles actually are tools of surveillance in many ways. So people can go back and look at your history. People can see what you liked, what you retweeted, what you posted yourself. And so these things can then be used against you. It's the very thing that we teach against at the university. We're trying to, inculcate students with a sense of courage and a sense of commitment and a sense of purpose beyond themselves.
Jonathan, what do you make of what Professor Tinson is saying there?
Social media it's a double-edged sword. I agree with him on that. As far as the culture of fear and things like that, before Trump was before he was in office, we had a history of things like COINTELPRO, J. Edgar Hoover. Before social media was around, that existed, right? So it wasn't, and fear, my dad reminds me, is just false evidence appearing real. But the reality is that, policing and things like that, that's what comes with that kind of work, is the surveillance. And so I think who gets surveilled the most typically is organizers, activists, is black and brown folk, or people of color and things like that. But at the same time, when it goes back to social media, my main emphasis is this: just make sure your days match your nights. You know what I'm saying? And your social media account is not your diary. And I tell you people this all the time. Do not use Facebook, Twitter, The young people use TikTok now, 6767. I don't even know what 67 means, but
yes.
I have no idea what that means. But like, do not use those platforms. I mean, if that's your brand and your personality and you want to be open like that, that's cool. But when you're doing this kind of work, you want to be mindful of, you know, how you document your personal life and how you present that to the public. It's cool. Like, I share stuff about my family all the time and stuff like that, but you would not know the intimate details of my everyday by going to my Facebook and things like that. That's something I write in a journal or I document for myself. Now, how you choose to use your platform is how you use your platform, but it takes the stress off of you a lot more when you do what I'm recommending.
Mm-hmm. That's a very practical piece of advice. Now, another thing that Professor Christensen addressed was the notion that colleges and universities radicalize students. He challenged that idea, saying that protest movements often originate on college campuses, that is, because students are receiving an education.
Students would rather be taking their classes and getting their work done and graduating on time. They do not come there just to protest. And I think this is a misnomer of how we look at the American Academy. A lot of people who already have contempt or worry, or they're fearful, or they think they're elite spaces, think that students are just coming there to protest. But students are coming there to learn. They're trying to advance themselves into the market of ideas and also the marketplace. So that's what the university and college has been, as a vehicle towards that end. Along the way, your awareness enhances because you're reading things that you weren't exposed to, and you're reading with a different level of depth and precision that you weren't exposed to in K through 12. Once that awareness happens, most conscious students want to act on it. And so that's the reason why you see a lot of protests, especially when you see university investments in a lot of the things that's happening around the world.
You're doing a lot of nodding as you heard that.
That's my brother right there. So Dr. Tenson's right on the money, and I write about this in the book. You don't get a freshman class who's like, oh, I'm coming to WashU, or I'm coming to Harvard, or I'm coming to Stanford, I'm coming to SLU to save the day. That's not the mentality. They're trying to invest in themselves, gain skill sets, knowledge, for network, and deepen all those different areas so they can enter the professional class or they can continue further their education. But what you get is an issue, like Dr. Tenson said, they become more informed, and some of them, they didn't get activated when they got in college. They may have been already on that trajectory like I was before I got to SLU. But the point is, they're on their own for the first time, and the same people that they laugh, cry with, party with, kick it with, all that stuff, when they agree that they're catching hell together, they want to do something about it, and that's when you got an issue. When instead of picking up a book, instead of reading a book, they're picking up a bullhorn, right? Instead of going to, instead of holding up tests that they're studying for and prepping for, they're picking up signage and things like that. And that happens as a result of the things that Dr. Tenson was describing.
What is it that people should be keeping in mind, and particularly college-age students, about the importance of organized support? You gave us a practical bit of advice regarding social media. What are some examples of the way that organized support is key to ensuring that people can remain safe even as they exercise their rights?
Exactly. I want to emphasize to young people that you are not on an island. You are not alone. Don't ever feel like that, right? I talk about candidly in my book how a lot of the people that demonstrated aren't with us now, and not due to natural causes, right? So the physical, the tolls that come with this work are very real. But some of them ended up not being here because of mental health issues, and some died due to overdose and suicide and stuff like that. And there was some that died due to murder and things like that. that's on an extreme level. But for you as a student, what I want to emphasize is that you find your people, right? You find those who you can take care of. They can take care of you. You inform yourself. Study, read, because the issues we're dealing with some of these problems are centuries old. And so what you want to do is inundate yourself with as much literature as you can to make sure that you sharpen your perspective. And then the other side of it is to make sure that, once you find your community, once you've identified whatever issue you have and things like that, that you take steps to protect your well-being and your sense of self. And I said this at a talk I gave at school last night. You don't have to burn out to make a difference. Mm-hmm. You don't have to jeopardize your future to build a world for a better one and things like that. And so I want young people to realize the fight continues. Yeah, you're going to be at the school probably 4 or 5 years or so, but you're needed for the long haul. Moving work is a marathon, not a sprint. That's advice I got from Mama Jamala Rogers, who wrote the book Ferguson is America. So do what you can, cause hell, do what you got to do on your campus, but make sure you get your work done, get your classes taken care of, be on top of that, because we need you for the long haul.
Mm-hmm. The big question, I think here, the first chapter of your book is, does protest work? Mm-hmm. And we could consider it to be rhetorical, but the end of the second paragraph, that's the first page of the book formally, is if protest works, why do injustices persist? So we can assume that you have an answer to this, but how often have you asked that question of yourself over the last 10 years?
Yeah, so mainly for me, it's a situation wherein, for example, we had some gains and some wins that came out of the Ferguson Uprising and things like that. The Clock Tower course is one of them through SLU, right? But with every advancement forward, there's backlash, there's pushbacks against what we're doing. So it's hard to protect and to nurture and grow those different outcomes we want. For example, when you get a Coriander Bush, then here comes AIPAC, right? And now you got you got the Brown McCulloch. You got the Brown McCulloch. Then you get these Clock Tower Accords, where's the funding to make sure that all these agreement items are lived with and actualized with substance, right? And so I think the main thing is, just because there's backlash and there's a reactionary push against the advancements that we've made, doesn't mean we haven't made advancements. We have to think more critically about how we protect those advancements and move things forward. So whenever injustice does rear its ugly head or it does come up, we're ready for it.
Mm-hmm. You completed writing the book last year. Mm-hmm. It's been published just last month. Mm-hmm. If you were to add something, though, between spring of last year and now, what would be the addendum?
I think more critique of what's occurring. When I say what's occurring, I'm speaking to just the ego, the violence, the greed, the cowardice that's happening with some of our so-called leaders in this nation, be they presidents, governors, directors, whoever. I think I would lean more into that more explicitly because when I finished writing the book, I was already acutely aware of what was happening on these campuses. But since then, when I say what's happening on these campuses, I'm speaking to, of course, the anti-genocide efforts on these campuses in regard to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and things like that, or the Israeli occupation of Palestine. But what has happened since, it hasn't been a full 4 years of this current administration, and in 1 year they're talking about they've already completed Project 2025 in terms of what they want to get done. So the opposition is organized and they're moving effective and quickly. So if I could write more in the book, it'd be to talk about ways we as a community could match that energy and push beyond. Not that work isn't being done. I celebrate the work of like the No Kings March and all those who are doing work, but there's still more to be done for sure.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan, in 20 seconds, what song do you think people should be listening to as they read the first chapter of this book?
Hey, like you give me a heads up on that. I got so much music in my head. I would say one song that would be really good to listen to would be Mississippi Goddamn by Nina Simone. That'd be a really, really good song to listen to. And when you listen to it, you'll see why.
Mm-hmm. Jonathan Pulphus is a St. Louisan Ferguson movement activist and author of the new book, With My People. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
This episode was produced by Emily Woodbury
and by Elaine Shaw. Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
The Gateway brings you the day's news each weekday from around the St. Louis region and the state capitals in Jefferson City.
Our schools are accredited. We don't need this bill.
And Springfield.
How many more years must pass before lawmakers see time is of the essence?
I'm Abby Larico. Join me each weekday for The Gateway on the STLPR app or wherever you get podcasts.